I want to tell you about a moment from one of my daughter KJ's basketball tournament weekends that I didn't expect to be thinking about, at least in this light, every day this week. So if you have ever done the travel sports thing, you know that it is often a lot of waiting. Right? They have their games, which is great, but then there is a ton of waiting in between. And so it is really easy to convince yourself to make sure that you use that time very well. And so I often will go with my backpack and my computer, and a lot of places have like tables that you can sit at. But this place that we were at this previous weekend, it didn't have a great spot to sit. And so I found a corner of the gymnasium behind an indoor soccer net. And I got settled, I opened up my laptop, and I started to go to work on this particular sermon. And my daughter, who's 10 years old, KJ, she came and she sat down with me, which was pretty cool, honestly. I think it's awesome that at 10 going on 11, she still thinks it is fun to come and sit down and hang out with Dad instead of just disappearing with her friends and teammates the whole day. So that was pretty cool. She was just sitting there while I was working, quiet, not trying to pull my attention away or anything like that. I mean, she just literally just sat down with me and was hanging out. And at some point in time, I looked over and I saw her sitting there. She's probably eating a snack or something. She wasn't huffing, sighing, not doing like a dramatic kid thing where they're like trying to get your attention or make you feel guilty without actually technically doing something, you know. She's sitting there with me, and I had this parent moment where I realized I may not be doing anything wrong exactly, but I'm probably missing a moment right here. Right? I'm missing something right in front of me. And so I engaged with her because we hadn't engaged. She literally was just sitting with me. And I said, KJ, I'm sorry I need to work like this. And she said, it's okay, I understand. I'm sure you need to do it, which is very kind, but also devastating too at the same time. And then she asked, she let it sit for just a second, and then she goes, well, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm actually working on next Sunday, because this was this previous Saturday, I'm actually working on next Sunday's sermon. And she said, well, what's it about? And so I tried to explain it in a way that would make sense to a 10-year-old, which honestly is a pretty good test as to whether or not I understand it myself. And I said something to the effect of, well, it's about how Jesus wants us to stay close to Him, because when we don't, we tend to get worn down and thin, and then we tend to start treating people badly, often even people we love. All right, we can get so caught up in producing instead of just taking our time with the people around us. And she said, oh, that's great. And then she added, that'll be really good for you. Right, which is it's not exactly what you want to hear from your daughter when you're telling her you're writing this sermon. And so I said, well, what do you mean, KJ? Does that sound like me? And she said, yeah, that's exactly you. She doubled down on it. Really kind. I mean, just and very innocent, not realizing at all what the moment that she had stepped into. So needless to say, I shut my computer, I took a selfie with her because I knew that we would be talking about this. And I asked her permission. I said, hey, this is actually a perfect setup for this thing. Do you care if I use the story? And she said, absolutely. So here's the deal. She was right in that moment. Right? I did not need to be working on that sermon in the moment, on this sermon in the moment. I wanted to. Right? I wanted to get it done. It feels so good when I have even just a rough draft of this thing. I wanted to feel ahead, check one more thing off the list, and that's not bad, right? That's not at all bad. I care about this. I care about preaching. I care about this church. But sitting behind that soccer net, my 10-year-old helped me see something that I probably should have already known. There I was, writing a sermon about staying close to Jesus while ignoring the person sitting right next to me. Right? And even just saying that out loud stings a little bit. Because my guess is that's not just a pastor problem. Right? A lot of us are trying to do the right things. We care about our families, our work, the responsibilities, providing, even our faith. But over time, we can start measuring life by what got done and whose needs we met. And we can be doing a lot of good things while at the same time something in us gets thin. And usually the people closest to us feel that first. Right? They do not mainly need us to be productive. They need us to be loving and caring and thorough and there and present. And sometimes, at least for me, when I start running thin, I become less of an everyday hero and more like an everyday meanie, right? Which is really not good branding for this sermon. But it's unfortunately accurate. Right? Because it's not that we usually do not care. Right? It's usually because we've been living disconnected from the kind of life that Jesus really invites us into. And so at Anthology, one of the ways we talk about, there's this word discipleship that pops up in churches. And really all that means is like becoming a student of Jesus, becoming more like Jesus. And so the way we really try and talk about this here, like on Sunday morning, is it's not just about learning religious information. It's not memorizing Bible facts, but we talk about training our actual lives to match the rhythms and teachings of Jesus. And so to close out this series today, we're going to jump into a part of Jesus' story that we find in John 15. And Jesus gives us one of the deepest pictures of that kind of life. Now, this moment that we're stepping into and we're going to read this morning, this is one of Jesus' final conversations before he goes to the cross, right? I mean, he is probably hours away from being arrested and put on trial for a crime he did not commit, and then eventually executed and hung on a cross. And here's the thing, he understands the moment that he is stepping into. Jesus understands the precipice of that he is getting ready to walk into, but he also understands that his closest followers, who have hung out with him for probably a little over 3 years, they do not understand the moment that they are stepping into. That his closest disciples, his closest students are about to walk into fear, grief, and pressure and failure that they have no idea is coming. And before Jesus sends them out to do anything for him, he tells them where life with him actually comes from. And so as we read this morning, I want you to keep the question in the back of your mind, what if the life that Jesus wants for you starts before the work he wants from you? So John 15, Jesus is speaking here. We're going to read verses 1 through 3 to start. It says this. Jesus is teaching them. This is kind of like his Braveheart speech, like right before all this stuff's about to happen. All right? And Jesus says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father, referencing God, is the gardener. He, God, cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so that they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message that I have given you. Now, look, we're going to set the context of the moment that we're stepping into here. There is so much to unpack in these verses that, we'd have to do a whole series on it. So we're going to kind of fly through this beginning part. And here, Jesus starts with a picture. Right? He goes, I am the grapevine, my Father is the gardener. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be a vineyard guy, but you do not have to know a lot about gardening to understand the basic picture that Jesus is driving us to here. A branch receives life. A branch does not create life. The branch is the conduit through which life is put to the fruit. And it lives because it is connected to the vine. Jesus is doing more, though, here than just giving a plant lesson. Now, the Old Testament, which is the pre-Jesus part of our Bibles, kind of like the first half of the Bible, God's people were often described as a vine or a vineyard. And the idea was that God had planted them, he had cared for them, nurtured for them, and he looked for fruit that was shaped by a life close to him. But over and over and over, again and again and again, they go looking somewhere else for life, and because of that, the fruit goes bitter. A prophet, which God would often use to send a message to his people, named Isaiah, puts it this way in the Bible. Now, you people of Jerusalem and Judah, you judge between me and my vineyard. This is God delivering a message to them. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I have not already done? When I expected sweet grapes, why did my vineyard give me bitter grapes? Now, here's the reason why I tell you that this morning. God is saying here, I gave you everything you needed for life with me, so why is the fruit so broken? And so when Jesus says here, I am the vine, he is making a huge claim. There is something big theologically that's happening here. He's saying that the life that God always wanted for his people is found in him. It's Jesus, right? And that's a very big claim. And it is one of the biggest reasons why he ends up being put on trial and executed on the cross, because he's essentially equating himself with God, saying, hey, look, if you want to get to God, you've got to go through me. Now, here's the deal. That's a big claim. And so if you're still wrestling with whether or not Jesus really is the way to God, I want to tell you something. Next week, we are starting a brand new series called Tough Questions. And I totally get wrestling with that. And we're going to give that specific question a whole week that we talk about when we start this next series. But here, I want you to notice what Jesus is doing. He's not giving them advice. What Jesus is doing is he's giving himself. He's giving them himself. And so verse 2 gets intense, where branches are cut off and some branches are pruned, and there's a warning in there, and there's care in there. There's a lot we could unpack. But the point is, Jesus keeps moving forward with this main invitation of, look, you've got to remain in me. You've got to remain in me. Stay close to me. And that's why verse 3 matters, right? Because he's pointing out that they've already been through this. Now stay close. Now, one of the things that it makes me think of is our family, we have a Mastiff, about 120 pounds. This is a pretty big dog. His name is Chase. Now, Chase was rescued from the Cleveland Pound. And we know very little information about Chase, but I think Chase knows the mean streets of Cleveland, because Chase is like, he's a good guard dog. Someone rings the doorbell, he lets you know. I mean, he is on it. But if he will not step out of that house, because he's like, I know how good I got it here. Right? I am staying close to home. I do not want to leave home. And that's what it makes me think of. Like, Jesus is saying, hey, look, you found a home. Stay close. That's what he's saying there in these first several verses. So then he goes on and he says this in verses 4 through 6. He says, remain in me and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. Now, verse 4 is where Jesus moves from the picture and the metaphor into invitation. Because now he's really driving that point home. Look, remain in me, and I will remain in you. Some translations will actually use the word abide, right? Which we don't use anymore. Right? That would be kind of like, maybe we should bring it back. Let's abide together. I don't know. But the idea is to dwell, like make your home there. So here what Jesus is talking about, he's not talking about some quick check-in with God, right? When life gets overwhelming. He is talking about a life that stays connected to him. A little while ago, my son Dalton is super into baseball right now, which I love, and we were in the front yard. We got these foam baseballs that we throw so he can hit and bat, and he can hit cars, and it's not a big deal. And we were playing outside, and I pitched a ball, and the ball went, and it just like perfectly, the leftover, we had like 7 flowers left over from Mother's Day, and so we've got them sitting on our front porch. And the ball clipped one of the flowers, and it just immediately just like cut it off. And one of the kids, a little concerned about it, took it, and they like put more dirt around it and stood it up, which looks great for that moment, right? But the roots have been cut. And once the roots are no longer connected, appearances can only help for so long. Now that flower is wilted and it is dead. And I think this is some of where we like misunderstand Jesus here. Right? Because the idea is that flower can exist, the fruit can exist because it is connected. And so we hear this like stay connected to Jesus, and I think sometimes like we can hear that as more like another religious thing to manage. But here in this moment, Jesus isn't saying stay close to God so that God stays happy with you, right? Or he's not saying stay close so that I can drain more out of you. Jesus is saying stay close because this is where life comes from. Apart from me, you will wither and die. Right? That's that part where he says you can do nothing. He doesn't mean that you cannot stay busy without him. Right? People accomplish things without Jesus all of the time. And I think that's why verse 6 gets so serious then. Because if we do not remain connected, if we do not abide in, that's when we wither. And a lot of us know what that feels like. Right? You keep going, but something in you feels dried out. Right? Where you are producing and you're getting things done, but there doesn't feel any life or joy in you. And that's where the people around you usually feel it first. And so Jesus isn't trying to scare us for no reason, right? He's just trying to deliver the truth. Look, if you disconnect from the source of life, you will not become more alive. So he gives the invitation, remain in me then. And so then he continues on with verse 7 and verse 8. He says this. He just kind of keeps circling the plane. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. Now remember, when we hear that word disciples, we think someone training to match their lives to the rhythms and teachings of Jesus. And that line in there, in these verses, where it says, ask for anything you want and it will be granted, right? That can get weird quick if that's pulled out of context, right? Because that almost sounds like God's handing us a blank check to build whatever life we want when we keep his commands. But Jesus gives us the key here first, where he's saying, if you remain in me and my words remain in you. So here he's not describing a life where he's describing a life where words take root and begin reshaping the things that we want. Now this is where this starts to get really practical. Because we can hear things like Jesus say, hey, do not worry, and yet we still let anxiety rule our life, right? We can hear Jesus say things like, hey, you should forgive them, and still replay the argument, nursing the bitterness in our heart. Right? We can hear him say, hey, seek first my kingdom. Hey, run after God, while everything else trains our schedule, money, attention, and energy. Right? And the point's not to beat anybody up. Look, I'm sitting right there with you. But this is where the metaphor gets into real life and change begins to happen. Right? Not instantly, not perfectly, but actually. Right? Where the connection makes a difference. And so prayer becomes more than just a list of things that I want that I bring to Jesus, asking him to bless whatever I've decided, and it becomes one of those places where Jesus starts to form and change me. Right? And over time, Jesus may teach me to pray, help me be faithful here, rather than God, make this easier. Right? I may start by praying, hey, God, change them, but over time, I start praying, Jesus, teach me to see the difficult things in me that I need to change. Right? That is what Jesus' words do when we remain in them. It starts changing our heart's desire, starts changing what we ask for, not just Bible words that we know, but Jesus' words actually catching us before our old habits take over. Does that make sense? And so he keeps going, and then verses 9 through 11, and this is really what I wanted to drive us to this morning, and this is really what was at least like pushing on me as I was studying this. Jesus says, he says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remember, the Father is God. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you these things, get this, so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. See, here now, so Jesus has taken us from a picture to an invitation to application, and now Jesus gets even more specific. He says, remain in me. Right? Now it's not just remain in me, or first he says remain in me, and now he's saying remain in my love. And that word, it matters. Right? Because you cannot remain in something you've never actually stepped into. Right? You can't remain in something that you've actually never started. You can't remain in the house if you've never been in there. You cannot remain in the love of Jesus if you've only been near Jesus, curious about Jesus, or familiar with Jesus from a distance. And so before we get into talking about the actual obedience that I think we can see from Jesus here, we got to have a moment where we talk about like what it looks like to actually step into Jesus. Right? Because some of you are in here and you're still investigating Jesus. You're interested, you're open, you're curious, you're listening, right? And you may be more open than you have been in a long time. I'm telling you, Anthology was started for people like you. I'm glad that you're here. But the reality is also, at some point in time, the invitation of Jesus, it's not just, hey, think about me. It's not just, hey, get close to me, be around me, near me. It is, come to me. It's trust me. It's follow me. It's get your life to match my rhythms and my teachings. Right? And Jesus doesn't invite us to earn our way into his love. He actually goes to the cross, gives his life, and rose again so that disconnected people could be brought home to God. Right? There is a verse in the Bible that actually says, while we were still sinners, while we were doing the thing that separated us from God, Jesus still went to the cross. And so, in the Bible, baptism is the clearest public way to say, I belong to Jesus now. Right? Not because it's some religious checkbox to check, but because it's the embodied, visible way of saying, Jesus' death is now my death. His life is now my life. I am not just observing from the outside anymore. I am going all in. And so that's why every week we try and make that invitation to say, hey, look, if you haven't done that step, right, don't tune this part out and think, well, like, I guess that's just for church people. It's not. That invitation may be specifically for you. Right? So if you're wondering whether or not baptism is your next step, like, I want to talk to you after service, or you can mark on the connection card, hey, I want information about baptism. And that's just to start a conversation. Right? No pressure, no weirdness. Let's just talk. And let me hear a little bit about your story and say, hey, what would it look like? Like, I can't remain in Jesus if I've never actually stepped into it. So, but now let's get back to what Jesus is really driving to in this moment. Jesus isn't threatening to take his love away from people who mess up, right? He's teaching his disciples how to live inside the love he has already given them, right? That's the order of the verse, right? The love comes first. And Jesus says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. And then he talks about obedience. So Jesus isn't saying, obey me so that I will finally love you. He's saying, I have loved you. You have found that home. Now do not wander away from the life that my love is giving you. And that changes how we hear his commands. Because I don't want us to think of his commands as the lock on the door that keeps us out. They're the teachings that help us stay where life is. And that's why in verse 11, he says so specifically, I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. And so maybe you don't want more joy in your life. But I know I personally, right now in 2026, feel like, you know what? I would love more joy. Right? And so Jesus isn't inviting us into a smaller, colder, more religious version of life. He's inviting us into his love, his life, and his joy. And this isn't fake joy, right? Because this is where like the context matters. Right? John 15 is part of Jesus' final teaching before the cross. He knows that his closest friend Peter is about to deny him. Judas, one of his other close followers, has already sold him out. And the rest of them are going to scatter. So whatever joy Jesus is talking about in this moment, it's got to be able to survive real life. Now, all of this moment goes together. John 15 is kind of like a cap of this like moment that Jesus has had. And it starts in John 13 because Jesus showed them what his love looked like. And this is a really popular story where they get together for the Last Supper, which is, you know, that painting that a lot of us have seen. And in that moment, Jesus, who they expect to be this king and this ruler, takes off his outer robe and he actually gets down and he washes the disciples' feet. And in that moment, he gives them a new command. He says, a new commandment that I give to you, that you love each other Now, here's the deal. That's not a new command, right? God's people have been told to love each other for a long time. So he continues, he says, love each other just as I have loved you, so you should love each other. And here's why that's important. Because now they don't get to decide what love looks like. Jesus, in that one small moment, he defines exactly what love is. Love is not just being nice. It's not avoiding hard conversations. It's not agreeing with everybody so that nobody gets uncomfortable. Jesus defines love by himself, and he gives us a shape that we cannot deny. And then he circles back around and he brings it back up in John 15. Remain in my love, keep my commands, and love one another as I have loved you. So the reality is that some of the joy that we are missing may not come back by waiting for life to calm down. Some of that joy might come back through obedience. Not religious busyness, right? Not doing more church stuff so that we can feel spiritual, but actually loving the person in front of us the way that Jesus loved us. And that sounds really beautiful until you start putting a name on it. Right? It gets a lot more difficult when there's a face attached to it. It gets a lot more difficult when it's your spouse after it's been 3 tense days of conversation. It gets different when it's your kid and they need patience and you're already irritated. Students in the room, it's different when it's your parent or guardian and every conversation just feels like a correction and they just need some patience. It's different when it's the person who's awkward, needy, different from you, just not naturally your kind of person. And I know this is true because I can agree with Jesus here and still come home short with the people that are closest to me. And it's not because I stopped believing any of this. It's because I was tired and thin and trying to love people out of the scraps. And so Jesus is not asking us to just like the idea of love. He's asking us to actually do it with real people when it really costs us something. And to be clear, I'm not saying that Jesus is saying you should stay in danger, enable sin, absorb abuse, or pretend that something is healthy when it's not. Right? Sometimes love tells the truth and creates distance or a boundary. But the reality is that I think for most of us, the bigger danger is not that we are too loving. The bigger danger is that we have learned how to explain away the moments that Jesus is asking us to love. We call it being busy, being tired, or just protecting our peace. Well, sometimes there's truth in those things, but sometimes, and I'm saying this as somebody who knows this move pretty well, it's just a cleaner way of saying I don't want love to cost me something here. So here's where I want to land this morning and close out this series. I think there's really 2 lanes for how we respond. All right, the first is for those that are still figuring out whether or not you believe in Jesus. Right, you do not have to fake certainty here. I would make plans now to be here next week as we start this series where we're looking at doubt. Right? We really want this to be a place where people can belong before they believe. But I also don't want you to stay vaguely interested in Jesus forever. Right? At some point in time, if you want to know whether Jesus is worth trusting, you actually have to get to know him. Right? Not just the Christians in the room, not just the church, but Jesus himself. And so one of the ways that you can do that is by reading your Bible. And so we put together a simple reading plan that we got a QR code, or you can take your phone and you can tap the dot on the seat in front of you. And here's the deal. It is just a simple 7-day reading plan out of the book of John. Right? And it will take you to make a copy of this Google Sheet, and we made it a Google Sheet so that you could write down in private answers to the questions that are asked in the moment. Right? It's an invitation to honestly look at Jesus. right? And that's an important thing that we need to do. The second is this. The second lane is for those of us who would say, like, I know Jesus, I need to get him to know better, but what is it that I'm supposed to go and do now? The better question that I think we need to ask here is, am I actually connected to Jesus, or am I just near a lot of Jesus stuff? Right? While I'm running on my own strength, right? Because those things are not the same. Something is shaping you. Right? The pace you keep, the pressure you carry, the approval you chase, the resentment you rehearse, the bitterness you give fertilizer to, staying connected to those things long enough, and they will form you. They will produce some sort of fruit in you. So this week, remaining in Jesus may look less dramatic than you think, right? It could be something as simple as spending some time with Jesus before you go check your inbox or scroll social media or respond to the thing that makes you tense. Remembering to say, hey, you know what? I need to take a minute here before I respond to my kid or my spouse. Or I need to make sure to put my phone away so that I can be present instead of disappearing somewhere else. Jesus, what would love require of me here? Right? Not 10 new habits, but one pause where words interrupt our reflex. Right? Staying close enough to Jesus that his words start interrupting the way that we were already planning to live. And I think that's probably the best place for us to end this series. Because the idea behind Everyday Heroes has never been about impressive people doing impressive things. It has been about ordinary people staying close to Jesus in real life. Because nobody puts that on the highlight reel. But that is the fruit. A tired person coming back. A guarded person making room for mercy. A normal home where Jesus starts reshaping words, attention, and love. And not because we worked harder at being better people, because we got better at staying connected to him. And so if you're curious, just come and see. Come and check it out. And if you're tired, the invitation is come back and receive. And if you've been around Jesus for a long time but feel dry, do not settle for proximity when Jesus is offering connection. Find ways and make time to remain in him. Let's pray. God, we love you. And God, we need help with this. I know I do anyway. Maybe nobody else in here does. But God, I am thankful that it doesn't matter whether or not I am good at this. God, I am thankful that you are. And so, God, when I am tired and worn down and run dry, God, would you help me find ways to lean back into you? God, and you're teaching there, and you're saying, hey, look, remain in me, stay close, and then that joy will overflow. God, would you help us to find that? God, would you give us some wisdom on how we could create rhythms and routines in our lives so that we could stay connected to you, God? And that could come through hangouts this summer with people that are like running in the same direction. God, it may be quiet moments on the porch by ourselves as we just take a moment to breathe. God, I don't know what it is for everybody in this room, but you do. And so, God, I'm asking for you to show up and help us figure out what it looks like to lean into you so that we could feel that life that you teach about here on this moment that they're getting ready to step into, which is going to be so difficult for them. And so, God, I thank you that you're not scared of those difficult moments and that you meet us in them and that we could still find life when we remain in you. So, God, would you help us to do that? God, it is in your Son's holy and awesome name we pray. Amen.